All right, why don't we go ahead and get started here? Thanks everybody for joining. We have an Evolytics Produce Tug today and guest speaker Chris Scott joining us. So we're going to go in a little bit different order than what is on the agenda. Liam is going to start it off and do performance optimization. Alex and I actually split our presentations apart, so he'll be going after that with some Tableau time savers. Then I'm going to talk specifically about troubleshooting in Tableau and how to cross-reference data sets using Tableau, using joins and blends. And then Chris is going to wrap it up with Tableau server, a deep dive into how to use the features for your users, all the front-end stuff on Tableau server that, in my opinion, probably is very underutilized, but very powerful. So he'll go into that. So I'm going to turn it over to Liam and he will get us started.
Awesome. Let me go ahead and pull my screen up. Cool. Can you guys see it? Awesome. Well, thank you guys for coming out today. Today we're going to be talking about performance optimization, how to let Tableau find the slow parts for you. As a quick heads up, my name's Liam Huffman. I am a senior data viz analyst at Evolytics. I've been here for about 2 years. I've used Tableau for 4 to 5 years at this point, been in it for a while. And what we're going to talk about today, the performance recording, is something that I think a lot of people forget exists. When we experience slowdowns in our workbooks, we often just try to brute force our way through it, but there are tools in the tool we use to make it easy. So let's talk through how we do that. We're going to start by just defining what performance recording is, how to use it, and how to interpret the results, how you can fix a problem based on what the performance recording tells you. Then we'll go through a little case study and some key takeaways. So what is performance recording? It's a feature that's in all supported Tableau desktop versions, and essentially it's a tool that tracks all the time taken for the workbook to complete each step in data generation. So anytime you click on a filter, anytime you change a parameter, anytime that you change any inputs for the workbook, it's going to capture each step. And this is really useful because it allows us to understand where the slowdowns are happening in the workbook and what's causing the issue. It makes it very easy to diagnose problems without having to invest a ton of time up front. So how do we even get a performance recording up and going? So we're going to walk through it in the tool after this, but just for your guys' notes, to create one, you go to Help in the top bar, go to Settings and Performance, and then choose Start Performance Recording. Then you'll start navigating through the dashboard the way you'd expect an end user to, so clicking on filters or expanding collapsing rows, whatever it is. Once you've finally gotten enough activity in there, you can go ahead and select that Stop Performance Recording, and it'll generate a new workbook for you that will look similar to this. We'll talk through what everything in here means in just a sec, but just to show you again, we're up in this top bar. Whoops, we got to drag the controls. There we go. Up in the top bar, we choose Help, go to Settings and Performance, and then we have the performance recording here. If I click into it, and then maybe I adjust some filters around, we're going to go back to Help, Settings and Performance, Stop Performance Recording, and it'll open a brand new workbook with those, with the performance of that dashboard. So a little inception here, performance recording for performance recording. This doesn't mean a whole lot, but that's how you generate a new dashboard or a performance recording. So once we hit that Stop Performance Recording, we get a workbook that contains 2 dashboards, the performance summary and the detailed views. The performance summary is this first one. We've got 3 different views in here, timeline, event sorted by time, and query. And then we've got this detailed views. This one We're not going to talk about much today. This is a little in-depth for what we want, I think. This is if you're really good at knowing exactly what all of the crazy command line stuff is. That is not my strong suit. I am much more comfortable looking in here and seeing what worksheet or dashboard is causing the slowdown. So we're going to focus primarily on that performance summary view as we talk through what this workbook looks like and how to use it. So on the performance summary tab, we've got 3 different sheets. The timeline, which shows your chronological order of events as they happen in the workbook. We've got the events, which is the events ordered by time to complete. And then we've got the query, which is an actual query. The actual query ran if you're to select like the executing query event. Let's talk about each of these sheets a little bit further. So timeline. Like I said, this shows the events in the order they happened, which is kind of halfway true. As you can see, it doesn't line up quite exactly. That's because we have to keep in mind that when when this workbook is generated, we've got to keep in the rows. So we've got to have a row for dashboards, for the worksheet, and then for the events. The worksheets and the events and dashboard kind of throw off everything being in a nice linear view, but we would lose the level of detail in the view if we were to take those away. The great thing about this is that it does help show if 1 or 2 sheets are the problem or if it's widespread. You know, if we saw some really long bars in here, we might get concerned and think, oh, looks like that sheet is definitely the problem. Or maybe we see it everywhere and we're realizing, oh man, this is much larger than I had originally anticipated. This is just a really quick and easy view to understand how the events are happening and when. The more useful chart, I think, is the events chart. This shows the total duration for every single event in the workbook. You'll see that there are a ton of stuff in here. We'll talk about each of the different type of events in just a bit, but this will show you those events ordered by time to complete, and this will help you pinpoint which events exactly are taking too long or longer than you want. If we see a huge bar, you know, all the way out here and everything else is nice and close to the baseline, then we know we probably need to figure out why we have one event that's taking so long. And then the third sheet in the view is the query. So if you were to select an executing query event, it will show you that exact query generated. This will have 2 different outputs depending on the data source you're connected to. So if you're using a Tableau source, you would get a result in XML, which is kind of what we have here. But if you're connected to a database, it would show you the actual SQL that's being run. So select star from whatever else is going on. These are really helpful to work with your data engineering teams. Normally, they're pretty good at understanding some of this more in-depth language. And so you can work with them to say, listen, I think that maybe there's a data source connection problem going on. Can we look at this query that's being generated and figure out where the slowdown is happening? So super useful to use in order to communicate better with your teams. So how do we even begin to interpret these views? As you noticed in the dashboards, timeline and events both have event on the color mark. Kind of hard to see in here, but if we scroll down a bit, there we go. You'll see that we've got this events on the right. This is our legend, and it's telling us all the different events that happen within this workbook, all the different types. Each one is color coded, so I can look at purples and know they're always compile query issues. Blue would be computing layout. Again, that just helps consistently know what is going wrong in each step. The event is the type of action being performed. And by that, I mean the actions taken by Tableau. This is not the actions you're taking. The actions that you take generate the actions for Tableau, and we want to know where those slowdowns are happening and why. And there are 8 different types of events. We're only going to talk about the first 7. This last one, server rendering, is only available if you run the performance recording on Tableau server. And I doubt most of us are going to be doing that. I think we'll mostly be working in the workbook. So we'll just cover the basic 7 that you guys would normally run into. So to start it off, let's talk through computing layouts. If you see that you have a huge bar for computing layouts, more than likely you have too many sheets or objects on the dashboard, or there's just too much complex formatting. So you might have a ton of blank sheets on there. We're trying to create that white space, these beautiful borders, these dividing lines. They look great, but they do take processing time. So some easy ways to counter a computing layout error or slowdown is to either combine some sheets, reduce the number of items on the dashboard, and use padding for that white space instead of blank objects. That just reduces the total count of items that Tableau has to generate anytime it runs that work or that dashboard. The second problem could be a connecting to data source. Generally, this is due to a slow connection to your data source. More than likely, you won't run into this unless you have really bad network issues or you just have a slow connection. But there are ways, it at least lets you know that you might need to go back and revisit how you're connecting to your data. The third is compiling query. The cause are complex data queries. So keep in mind, this is the query that Tableau is running in order to generate the view. So this is not your backend SQL. If you've got custom SQL as your data source, that is not the issue we're discussing here. These complex data queries are kind of hard to target what exactly is wrong. Turns out a lot of things go into the queries that Tableau runs for us. Generally speaking, your goal is to simplify that generated query, get it as fast as possible. To do that, you can reduce filter counts or make the filters action filters. You could limit your number of complex calculated fields. You can reduce LODs or lengthy and complex if-else statements, or you can move some of the harder calculations to the data source. So if there's any really, very specific row level calcs that you're using level of detail in place of, try moving them into the data source and let the data side do the heavy lifting for you. We can also have issues with executing query, which is caused by a complex data query or underlying data structure just not being optimized for Tableau. Again, simplifying the generated query like we just talked about by reducing those filters or making them context filters could be really helpful. Otherwise, just reconfiguring the data structure, moving to an extract could really speed up the executing query events. Generating extracts. Our data source extract is too large. Make sure that you're only importing the necessary columns. If you don't need all the columns in a table, don't port them all in. That's just extra processing time for Tableau. We can use extract filters to limit the data coming in when we generate that extract. Or we could try using a sampling of the data or the empty extract method. If you haven't heard of empty extract, I know we have a blog post about it that is super helpful. So definitely check that out. But it's essentially a way to make the server side do all the data loading for you instead of making the machine. Just kind of outsources the work and make sure that you're not getting slowed down. And then geocoding. This you'll never really run into unless you're dealing with location data. But essentially, the cause is just too much location data. So be wary of that and filter out any unnecessary rows or try to move to a lower level of granularity. Maybe if you can skip city and just go to zip code, that'll clear up a lot of your rows. So now that there's one more, the blending data. So dealing with blends can always slow down a workbook a little bit. Be very careful that you're not creating many-to-many relationships or that there's too much data. If you are running into these issues, then it may just be worth it to reconfigure those blend relationships, those joining fields, or filter some of the rows out if possible. If you know you won't need some of them, maybe do a data source filter to remove some of those lines so that we're not pulling unnecessary data in. So those are all the different ways to, or at least the quick ways to fix some of the problems based on your performance recording. But let's actually go through a case study to discuss where we've used it in a situation on our own. So we, this past September, one of our clients reached out to us that a dashboard they'd been using for years that we had built for them was suddenly taking forever to load. Now, this was not a quick dashboard to begin with. It took at least 2 to 3 minutes to load one dashboard in the workbook normally. So when they said it was running slow, at first we were like, well, how slow is it? It turns out it was about 10 minutes plus to load, if it would even load at all. So we had a completely unusable workbook just overnight. Of course, we need to figure out what broke and how we were going to fix it. So our first step, as always, is to download the workbook and open it up. It was pretty slow to open, which is always a little concerning, but we were dealing with a data source that had nearly 1 billion rows in it. So we would expect some lag time. What was really concerning, though, was that when we tried to filter down the date range, it was taking still 15 to 20 minutes in the workbook for that date range filter to take effect. And that is a problem. So we tried limiting the data source to just a couple hundred rows to see if we could find the problem there. Unfortunately, the filter changes were still taking 15 to 20 minutes with a super limited data set, which means that this was probably not a data source issue, which is the worst news. This was probably a workbook problem, and we needed to figure out what was going on under the hood. So our first step was to start a performance recording. And this is what we got. As you can see, we had some compile query stuff that were taking 1,257 seconds, or about 20 minutes. Then we had some computing layouts that were taking over 10 minutes. I mean, it was just a mess. You'll also see, though, that right beneath that last major event, we go back to normal times. So 2.82 seconds, 0. whatever seconds, way faster than what we were getting. We also realized that all of these issues were coming from this one worksheet, this keyword index across, which is really helpful because that tells us that we need to go figure out what is wrong with that worksheet and why it's slowing down this specific dashboard. So because we had two different problems, that computing layout and compiling query, we decided to tackle the computing layout first. That's normally the easiest thing to fix, right? That is all about removing objects from the dashboard. Now, this was a dashboard that had been handled by 5 or 6 different people over its lifetime. I'm sure we've all inherited a workbook like that before. So people had just kind of been moving things, hiding things, changing random stuff over the course of time. So it was a pretty messy workbook. This specific dashboard, we had a lot of column headers that were separate text boxes. This always looks really nice, but depending on the number of columns you have, that could be 10 additional text objects on the dashboard that it now has to populate. And if you have parameters in those text boxes like we did, then it has to calculate the parameter values for each of those text boxes, and that can be really slow. So we went ahead and moved those, the text boxes, took those out, and just moved to native sheet column headers. I cleaned those up a little bit, and they looked just as good. We also had a lot of blank objects that were creating white space and dividers. Again, we don't need all of those. That's what padding is for. So we went ahead and moved to those inner and outer paddings and shading to create a similar look with just less stuff. Now, this did reduce the lag time by a minute or so, but the biggest problem had not been tackled. 1 minute off of 20 doesn't mean a whole lot to a stakeholder. That's still 19 minutes they have to wait for that dashboard to load. So it's time to tackle the second set of issues, those compiling query. As I said during the compiling query, filters are a great place to begin with. Filters are normally quick and easy. We can remove them. We can add them to context. There's lots of easy stuff to do to improve filter performance. So like I said, we took several of those filters and moved them onto context where it made sense to prevent the data from even hitting the sheet. So we didn't even have to run those calculations for rows that were already filtered out. We also moved some filters to the data source filter. Alex is going to talk about this a little bit more, but since we were using a Tableau published source, we were using the data source filters as opposed to extract. Function very similarly, but in our case, just filtered out anything major in the workbook. And then we removed some unnecessary filters. Keep in mind, this dashboard had like 15 or 20 filters on it originally, just something massive. Our stakeholders were very curious and wanted to dig in deep. The problem is that really makes a complex query. And so we asked them to narrow down to like the top 6 or 7 filters that they use regularly, and everything else we could just run as an ad hoc, analysis if need be. Once we reorganized those filters, we were down to about a 15-minute, 10-minute load time. So way better than we were at before, but still not great. We still, you can't just be sitting there waiting for the dashboard to hopefully open. So then we had to move to the harder step, the calculations. Calculations are never fun to diagnose. Jay's going to talk a little bit about that diagnostic process as well. But as far as we were concerned, this was too long. So like I had said, this dashboard had been handled by several people over the years, which means that there were a lot of complex and unused calculations in the workbook. Some of them, people had inherited the workbook, realized they didn't quite understand what the original calculation was doing, and would rebuild it. In theory, not an issue. We always want people to understand what they're doing in the workbook. The problem is that if we never delete those calculations and we just keep adding more, then we continue to get increasingly complex workbooks. So we removed a ton of unused fields. Anytime you see, calculation 1 through 9, it's probably worth visiting whether we need all of those unnamed calcs. There were also some really complex calculations in here. There were some nested LODs where we're doing like excludes within a fixed statement. These are really time consuming. We're having to do entire table scans to generate those fields. And so we wanted to cut some of those out and make it a little bit easier. Some of those got moved into the data source, so they were no longer being computed on the Tableau side. Some of them got moved to table calcs, which are natively much faster for Tableau to process than an LOD. The biggest problem, though, were inefficient but necessary calculations. Because we had to have some calcs the way they were, we had to look at how the sheets were structured as well. So changing around a little bit of sheet structure and organization really helped a lot. And in fact, it got our load time down to about 45 seconds or a minute. So finally, we had a much more reasonable looking performance recording. Yeah, the compile query, can still take 40 seconds, but I would much rather be waiting for a minute than 20 minutes. And in fact, this dashboard was now faster than before the problems arose. So whatever we had fixed was better than what they had originally. Now, we still do not know what caused this workbook to suddenly run slower one day. And we will probably never know the cause because the client has since shifted their databases and made some massive structural changes. They updated Tableau, which was huge. But On the plus side, we've never had any issues with that workbook since we made the fixes. So what should you take away from this entire discussion? One, Tableau documentation is great. Any of the definitions or information that I shared with you outside of the case study are directly from Tableau. They've got incredible resources available, very easy to find. Just Google performance recording Tableau and you'll find tons of documentation. Two, start small with the adjustments for tracking. Just change a filter at a time and see what happens. If you start adding too many different actions into the workbook performance recording at once, then we may lose sight of what the actual problem is, because now we're creating competing queries. So just change one thing at a time, stop the recording and see what happens. That way you can really figure out which steps are taking the longest. And finally, always fix the easiest stuff first. They may solve the issue very quickly. That won't always be the case, but if you can at least fix the easy stuff that doesn't take too long, then you won't have to dig into the workbook for much longer. Or you can at least rule out some of those other issues. So thank you guys for listening to my talk on performance recording. I hope you guys are able to utilize this in your workbooks and generate some helpful speed ups for your work.
Thanks, Liam. We did have a couple of questions, actually. I tried to answer one of them. I think Tom asked a question about blank objects and containers slowing down the workbook. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, so any object we put in the dashboard is going to impact the computing layout. So if you keep adding in extra objects, it's just going to add to the processing time for Tableau to calculate the workbook. That said, obviously containers and like blank objects are a little bit more native. It's not trying to populate data within those or anything like that, so they'll be faster, but we always err on the side of removing as many objects as possible.
Yeah, I think it's negligible, but you know, when you get down to when you have a lot of sheets on a dashboard, you know, I've had dashboards with 50 or 60 sheets on them, you try to just do whatever you can at that point to try to help it.
And then when you do performance recording, does each recording overwrite the previous one? No, it does not. It opens up a brand new workbook. So you will never have to worry about that performance recording, that original one, disappearing on you. It'll always create a brand new file.
Yeah, so usually when I do performance recordings, I'll have a lot of them.
Yeah.
I'll do one, I'll make a change, I'll do another one, I'll make a change, and just like incrementally, because your stakeholders want to see like, where did it start? Where did it end? You know, it's just to keep track of that too. I'll put it in a spreadsheet and like put that into Tableau too, as far as like, hey, it was this, and then it was this, and then it was this. So you get in a nice little process. It's a little bit tedious, but it can get real confusing if you don't name your performance recordings according to what feature or what you changed, right? Because you have to keep track of that.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, I think that's it. Thank you, Liam. That was a great presentation. All right, next up we have Alex. He's going to talk about some Tableau time savers and troubleshooting in Tableau. Alex, do you want to take it away?
Absolutely. Let me get my screen shared. And if I can get a head nod, if you guys can see my screen.
We can see it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so like Jay said, we're going to be covering some time-saving tips, troubleshooting in Tableau. Before we jump in, I will tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a data viz analyst at Evalytics. I work a lot in Tableau, Power BI, Data Studio, a bunch of different data viz tools for clients, and I've really enjoyed doing it. When I'm not building bar charts and donut charts and all the various different types of charts in Tableau, I have a passion for real estate investing, particularly rental property investing. So on the weekends, I'm usually on YouTube trying to figure out how to do something that I have no idea how to do. Like I barely knew what a hammer was 6 months ago, and I've found that out in 6 months. So we're making some slow progress. So with that, we will jump right in. So today we are going to be covering empty extracts, extract filters versus data source filters, some QA for time series data, how to handle column name changes, aliased values, and hidden data. And a few of these things I did not know about before I came to Evolytics, and I would spend way more amount of time than I would like to share trying to figure out why I can't find what I'm looking for. And then Jay's like, oh, you just got to do this. And I'm like, oh. So hopefully you guys will be able to, save some time with some of these tricks I'm about to show you. Alrighty, so the first topic we're going to cover are empty extracts. I'm sure many of you guys have had instances where you're working with large data sets that are millions and millions of rows, and you just may wait 10 minutes or so waiting for your data to refresh. So this empty extract trick, I've read a blog that Ryan Stryker wrote. I know other people have wrote blogs on empty extracts as well. But what you're doing is you're utilizing Tableau server to handle the extract refresh for you. And this is really great for those big data sets that take a long time to refresh. So the steps to create an empty extract is first you're going to create a parameter. Then you're going to create a calculated field that references that parameter. We're going to define the extract using our new calculated field as a filter. We're then going to run the extract and flip the extract parameter to no. And then finally, we'll publish the workbook and refresh on the server. And we will walk through these steps here. So I'm going to show you on a slide quick, and then I'll actually go into Tableau and show you too to really double down on it. But this first step here is we're going to create a parameter. You can name it empty extract parameter if you'd like. We're going to have a Boolean data type. You don't have to change your aliases to yes, no, I did, but whatever it starts with just true, false, I think. You're going to then show your parameter and then make sure you have yes selected on that parameter. The next step is going to be creating a calculated field that's going to reference that parameter. So that calculated field is going to take on whatever value your parameter selection is, right? So this parameter we created on this slide, or we will create, if it's yes, that calculated field is going to have yes as the value. We're then going to go and create an extract filter and use our new calculated field to filter this data. And so here, if we go and search empty extract, select it, and then we are going to exclude every row in the data set where the calculated field we just created is true, which when the parameter is selected as true, that's going to be all of the rows. Then you will click OK, and you will run the extract. And then if you go to any of your worksheets that's using this data source, they're all going to be blank. And that's what we want, at least initially. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip that parameter to no, and then we're going to publish it on the server. So what's happening is you'll publish. So when you refresh or when you create that extract with that filter, it's going to refresh really quickly because there's no rows, right? Because you filtered all of them out. Then you'll publish it. And then once you go onto the server, it will initially be just a blank dashboards or whatever you have published. And then whenever your refresh is scheduled to run, or you can manually refresh it yourself, which is what I do to make sure it worked, it will refresh with no as the selected parameter value, which will deactivate that filter we created, and your data will populate. So then your data will be on the server. And if you wanted to do this extract So you could work locally in Tableau desktop with a refresh data set, which is what I typically do. Then all you got to do is download the workbook and you have a refresh data set. And we'll walk through these steps. I know that sounds like a lot, but it is much faster once you get the hang of it than waiting 10, 15, 20 minutes for your data to refresh. If you guys don't know what this GIF is, when Tesla was demoing their, I think this is technically their truck, I don't know. They were trying to show off how strong their windows were. Like if you throw a baseball at it, it won't even break the window. And as you've seen several times, it does break the window. With that, we will get into creating this extract. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a parameter. So if you click the drop down here, click on create parameter. I've already created it, so I'm just actually going to edit mine. I named it empty extract parameter. It's Boolean. And then I just changed the aliases to yes and no. Then the next step was to create a calculated field. And again, I've already created that, so I'm going to open it up. And it's a little bigger. So all we're going to do is reference that parameter we just created, right? So it's just going to take on whatever value that that parameter has. And then I'm going to turn this empty extract parameter on. One step I forgot to share, when you create that parameter initially, you'll have to right click, go over your parameter and click show parameter, so it pops up over here. So you have the parameter created, you have the calculated field created, and then we've toggled this to yes. Then we're going to go to our data source. And I'm going to click on edit. And again, this only works if you're using extract, hence the empty extract trick here. Then you'll click on edit. And you would click on add to create, and then you would find that field you just created, right? The empty extract parameter. I've already have it created. So I'm just going to click edit here. And then all we're going to do is click on exclude and then check true and click OK. And then click OK. And then when we go to our sheet, and you'll see it actually did refresh. It was so quick because there's no rows, so you didn't see it load. But now we don't have any, we don't have a row count. I didn't point it out, but we did have, I think it's about 90,000 rows, and that was populated here, but now nothing is showing up because we have it filtered out. I'm not gonna do it in this exercise, but the next step you would do is you would just flip this back to no, and then you would go to the server and then publish it wherever you would publish. It would publish a blank workbook on the server, and then you would just manually refresh on the server and then pull it back down if you want to work on it locally. So that is empty extracts. And again, it's a pretty great trick, especially for those really big, when you're working with a lot of data. I definitely don't do it in every scenario. There's no magic number. It just kind of depends on what your preference is. I use 2 million rows as when I start to think about it a little bit, but sometimes I have a workbook that's tied to 3 million rows and it works as fast as I need it to. So ultimately it's up to you and what you're willing to tolerate. Yeah, a pretty awesome trick. Next, now that we've covered empty extracts, we're going to jump in to extract filters versus data source filters. So extract filters are when the data is filtered before the extract is created. So if you have your data source and you want to filter whatever data you are pulling in, let's say we want to filter region to west. If you did an extract filter, then the actual size of your extract would be smaller because the filtering takes place from the database and then the extract is created. A data source filter, on the other hand, data is not filtered prior to the extract. The filtering occurs when Tableau queries the extract to populate the data for your visualizations. So in this case, the size of the extract is not impacted by the data source filter. So again, if we wanted to filter on West, the extract would be larger than in the scenario above, because we're still going to have other regions in our data set. But when we go to create our visualizations, or when they begin to populate rather, that is when the filtering will take place, and only West will be included. And so now I tried to show side by side the difference between these two. So we have two different databases, or the same database, just using different filters, I guess, with 10,000 rows. At the top, we're using an extract filter, where the size of the extract is actually smaller than, well, down below, we don't have any extract filter, right? So we still have all 10,000 rows. And then if we go to create our visualization with this extract filter, we're gonna have 3,000 rows included unless we do additional filtering. Down below here, again, since we don't have an extract filter, it's still 10,000 rows here. The extract is larger than above. But if we use a data source filter and do the same type of filtering that we did above with the extract filter, we're still going to end up with the same amount of rows. The big difference being the size of the extract. And finally, I just wanted to show the Tableau order of operations. This is something to be mindful of when you're using extract filters and data source filters. So Tableau is going to operate the extract filters first and foremost, and then data source filters. And you can use both. So to be consistent with the scenario we've been talking about, if you wanted to filter your region to West, you could do that with an extract filter. And so let's say you filtered it to your region to West, and then your extract was only included 3,000 rows. But then you want to do further filtering with your data source filter, you could do that. So you could filter another field, and whatever you filtered that down to would be what populates in your visualization. And here I'll just go ahead and pop over into Tableau real quick and show you where you can find those. I know previously with the empty extracts, we showed you where to find the extract filters. And if you're using a live connection, extract filters are not a choice. So then you're just going to use data source filters if you want to. But in this instance, we are using an extract. So to create an extract filter, we could just click edit here, just to the right of extract. And then you could click add and then filter on whatever fields you would like. And there are a bunch of other different fields for customization that you guys can explore. And then this data source filter is actually just going to be further over to the right here, where if you click on add, and then you could click on add again and use a data source filter here. Alrighty. So next, missing data. Okay, so you have your extract / data source filter set up appropriately. You start building out your dashboards. You create a calculated field to pull on the last 30 days, but for some reason it's not working. So if it will load for me. So since I flipped that parameter back over on that empty extract at the end, it's now having to populate again, because originally we had it as null. So fortunately, this is only, I think, about 90,000 rows. We'll see. So you shouldn't have to watch too long. Okay, so here we are looking at Hoopinator data, which is NCAA men's basketball data. And we have a date along columns, and we have a sum of 3-pointers made on our rows. However, nothing is pulling in. I'm going to pull off this filter real quick just to show you that there is data. So we're using the last 30 days calculated field. We're going to go ahead and open that up. And So you'll see right now we're using, this is our date field, and we're essentially saying if the data falls within the last 30 days and is less than or equal to today, we want to include the data. So, but for some reason, our data is not pulling in. And why would that be? So now we're going to talk about why and when it is appropriate to use match date calcs instead of the today function. Utilizing the today function in date calcs can be problematic if your data is not current. So again, this is that formula we just pulled up where we're using that today function to pull in our last 30 days. However, we're not seeing the data we thought we would see. How can we solve this? We are going to first create a max date calculated field. So here we're going to use the max function, and then we're going to wrap in squiggly brackets to make sure we are looking at the max date across our entire table. Next, we are going to replace today with that max date field that we just created. And then we should be good to go. All right, we're going to go ahead and demo this again. So first, we are going, I already have the field created. All you would do is open this up and swap this out with the max date field you have created. Here is our max date field. So again, it's just max wrapped in squiggly brackets with the date field you're using. And then this would be the max date field we want to use. So instead of that today function, we're using max date. So now I'm going to go ahead and take this, and some of you may already know this, but if you just drag and drop right on top, you will actually replace it. And then we want to include all data where this logic is true, because that's including the last 30 days. And now you will see we have data populating. So what we're essentially doing here is we're updating our reference point to account for data that is older, right? So what I meant to show you earlier, when we weren't seeing data showing up earlier, one thing I would typically do if I wasn't sure what was going on is you could throw date on rows. And here we have and sort descending on your date, which this is already sorted. And here we can see, oh, this is only pulling data from January 30th. So that's our problem. Our formula was referencing the last 30 days from today. And obviously that's not going to show what we want. So by using that max date calculation, we're using January 30th as our reference point. Now, how do we know? So if we do that and our data starts to populate, which is great, how do we know that the max date field that we created, we can trust? Like, how do we know it's actually using the appropriate date? So here is where, and we'll go into a few different other things I'd like to look at, but a data source check, if you will. So one of the first things I like to do when I start to work with new data is just to throw number of records, or in newer versions of Tableau, number of records is no longer a field, but I think it's like table name dash count or something like that. I like to take that field and throw that onto my text. Just to see, a lot of times I'll have a general idea of how big I expect the data set to be. And if it looks off, then I know I need to do some more investigating. The next thing I like to do is just to throw date onto the rows. You could throw it on as a year as well if you have many years, but I usually end up going down to the date level just to make sure everything looks how I expect it to. And then you can take that max date field you created, and there's other ways to do this. This is just one way that I've found has been pretty efficient for me. Just take that max date field and throw that on your columns. And again, we'll make sure that date is sorted in a descending order. So the largest date at the top, if that max date does not match the date at the top, then you know you have to do some more investigating and see why that isn't adding up the way you thought it would. And then one other trick I like to do is throw any dimensions that are pretty critical or important to the project. One of the main things that the client is going to want to see the data sliced by. And I like to throw that on the columns just to see if anything looks funky. With this Hoopinator data, I didn't really realize this when I was, before I started creating this, but it looks like there's actually a bunch of nulls here for some of the earlier years. I know Jay's worked with that data more than I, so he may know why. But yeah, I think this is a good example of throwing some of those dimensions on columns or however you want to investigate it. Again, there are multiple ways to do it. This is just sort of the idea of what can be helpful. But in this instance, it may show you things about the data that you weren't sure about. Okay, so if everything is working seamlessly, and then all of a sudden you get the dreaded red pill. And actually, we'll go over to this workbook real quick. So here we have a stacked bar chart. And in this, so we have region as red, right? So what could be going on? Right now, it looks like it's fine. This is a one time. I actually want my workbook to break and watch it not break for me. Let's see while this loads. That is how it would work, right? It always breaks when you don't want it to. Let's see if we can. Oh, I told Jay prior to this and other people that my Tableau had crashed several times a day. And I was like joking because I didn't think it would actually happen again. And here you have it. So I actually do have another instance open as a backup. I don't have a third, so we're going to keep our fingers crossed here and I hope this works. So let me try this. Actually, I'm going to try it. I was a little worried that this refresh is it's just a Google Sheet I'm tied to. I'm just tied to this Google Sheet. So I don't know why that would cause Tableau to fail. Well.
Hey, Alex.
Yeah.
You need to refresh your extract, not refresh the data source.
Yeah. Go down to the bottom. Yep. Extract.
Down.
Extract. Nope. Right in the middle.
Okay, here we go. I'm learning something new.
There you go.
Okay, there we go. So if you guys need to extract your, refresh your extract, just click on data. Okay, so now we have the red pill. So how can we fix that, or what are we running into here? One thing you can look to do is replacing references. So in this instance, we have region again, it's failing. Before we go into the how, let's show you why. So what's going on in this workbook, you can see region here is also highlighted. If we go look, and our data source is a Google Sheet here, we can look for region and we are not seeing it anywhere. This is a pretty simple data set, so it's pretty easy for us to see that if we look at long enough, it looks like the column name actually got changed to location. So what we can do is we could hard code this and change it to region, but most likely in a lot of instances that I run into, if you do that, the next time you get the data, it's going to be location again, and you're going to find yourself changing that over and over again. So what we can do is we can use replace references. So what we're going to do is right click on region and go down and click on replace references. And once we do that, we will be given a dialog box where we're asked to identify which field we want to swap out what was previously region or whatever field we right clicked with. So in this instance, we would want to use location. So if we go over and do that here in Tableau, you can right click, click on replace references, click on location, click OK, and there we have it. This was a pretty simple example where we were just swapping out for one pill, but this will also replace those references in any calculated fields that you have, which can save you a lot of time and digging, and also make sure that you don't miss any fields that you weren't aware they were included on. Okay, so what if the field is in the data source, but you can't find it in Tableau? So in this scenario, we're going to try to create sales by category. So if we were going to go do that, let's go take our sales and we're going to throw that on rows, and we're going to take category. Well, category is nowhere to be seen. And now what we're going to do is we're going to check for any renamed fields. In Tableau, a lot of times people will, if your data source has underscores or just the field name doesn't make sense or it's a little foggy, people will change the field names. In this instance, as you can see, we have category in our data source. And then if you look in the data source view in Tableau, category is nowhere to be found. But if we look a little longer and a little harder, here, again, this is a pretty simple example. It may not be this straightforward where it's really easy to find what field it is. Some things I've done in the past is download the data into Excel and do it. If I know I'm looking for a field that has medium, short, tall, or whatever the field values are, I'll do a Control F and then try to figure out what the actual name of that field was. Okay, so what we're gonna do here, actually, this GIF is a little bit too fast. So the field we were looking for, I can't even remember, category. So we can't find category in here. I'm gonna go back to my data source. Can't find it here either. But we do know that category had the values tall, medium, short. So if we right click here and click on describe, we can see that the actual name of this column prior to it being adjusted was category. So we have the data source and then we have the field name. You can also find that in here if you right click on size, you can do the same thing. You can find it in here. So now that's I guess it's one thing to look for if you're not really sure. See if you can find common field values, and if you can find common field values, use that describe feature to see if the column just got renamed. Okay, so what if the field values don't match? Okay, so at the top here, we have, it looks like we have long descriptions of a response to a questionnaire for a product. And then at the bottom, we have, in our actual data source view in Tableau, we just have numbers. So again, this is our data source in this Google Sheet. We have all of these long sentences. And then in Tableau, if we look here, we just have for response in our rows, we have a bunch of different numbers, right? So the response column here had a bunch of sentences, and our response here has a bunch of numbers. So here is when you're going to want to check for alias values. So in Tableau, you can also create an alias for specific field values that a column has. So what we're going to do is here we have a pretty good hunch what field it is because it's also response, right? So here we know it's response. The field name is the same, but the values are different. So what we can do is we can right click on the actual value here click on edit alias, and then I'm just gonna delete this and click OK. And here we have what the alias was, or what the actual original value was. The shirt I ordered was stained. They included handwritten instructions on how to remove the stain. Wouldn't recommend to my worst enemy. This next one, we can do the same thing. Edit alias, remove it. And if you clear these aliases, you may have a good understanding of why they actually created those aliases. So the first alias was 1, this one's 2. This one would recommend to anyone who likes uncomfortable clothes that don't fit. Horrible product. So what this is probably is a rating of 1 to 10 on this product. Whoever created this workbook used an alias to rank these. A lot of times these tricks are helpful for when you're taking over workbooks. If you're the one who created the aliases, you're most likely going to know what they stand for, but in this instance, we didn't. A more efficient way, if you want to remove all of the aliases or quickly see what they stand for, you can right click on the field and then click edit aliases, and then all of them will pop up, and then you can clear them if you want. You can just look at them. But yeah, make sure you're looking when you know that when you've identified the column, right, and you see it in Tableau and the values don't match, this is one you're going to want to check for aliases. So what if I am still missing fields? Okay, so in this scenario, we have field 5 and field 6. You can see I got really creative with the field names towards the end of this presentation. But in Tableau, field 5 and field 6 are nowhere to be found. So if we look over here, we're not seeing field 5 and field 6. So here's where we are going to check for hidden fields. So in this GIF, you're going to click the drop down once you're on the right data source and click unhide hidden values. Again, the GIFs are a little fast, so I'll hop back into Tableau. We're going to go ahead and click this drop down here, and then am I blind? Oh, I think I'm on the wrong data source.
Click on the other data source. Click on game stats if you're using that one.
Oh, there we go. Cool. It is this one. I don't know why it's not. That is strange. Okay, so I'm gonna hide one right now to show you guys.
You have to, yeah, just click hide all unused fields in your drop down.
I don't know why I can't select hide. That's very strange. So I clicked hide all unused fields. And then if I click here, usually you can, I don't know why hide's deselected. Let me try my other data source and
Because
see.
you're using it. You can only hide fields that aren't used. So go back to your drop down. So click show hidden fields because you hid one of them. So now data size are hidden.
Okay. So let me unhide that. So yeah, so in this instance, it looks like we had different fields hidden. And so what you would do, like Jay eloquently showed me, is you would click this drop down here and click show hidden fields. And then they're going to be grayed out. And so if you try to use these, so if I were to try to drag that on the label, it's not going to let me because they're still hidden. They're not hidden. You can actually see them, but Tableau is they're not included in the extract. That's one of the main reasons that you would use this feature. If you have fields that you know you're not going to be using, you could right click them, click on hide, and then Tableau won't load them in the extract. If you, for whatever reason, change your mind and you did want to include them, you could unhide them by clicking that drop down, click show hidden fields. And then if you right click, you could click on unhide, and then you can just use it as you normally would. Okay. And again, here, one of the main reasons why you would hide fields in Tableau is because it reduces the size of that extract. Some people like to do it just because if you have tens of maybe even 50 fields or so in your data source, it can kind of clutter what you have on the left pane. So people like to hide them. So it sort of reduces clutter there. And then last but not least, we're going to go over hidden values. So here you can see we have clothing type, which has values of shirt, pants, and socks. But then in Tableau, if we're looking at those, it looks like we only have shirt showing up here. And again, our data source, actually I have aliases on these. But if we went to our data source here, we could see we have shirts, pants, and socks here. But then on here, for some reason, we're not seeing those fields. Why might that be? So here is when we're going to check for hidden values. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over clothing type, the dimension we're using, and we're going to right click and click show hidden data. And now you'll see all of our data is populating. I've used this in the past when I'm working with table calculations. So in this instance, we're using a percent of total sales for clothing type. And in this scenario, maybe somebody just wants to see what percent of total sales came from shirts. So what you could do is you could, create this visualization, create your table calc, and then you could, if you only want to see shirt, you could right click on pants and then right click on socks and then hide. But again, if you're taking over a workbook, you might not know that. So one thing you want to look for is anytime people may have hidden fields. And that closes it for me. So we will go ahead and pass it on to Jay.
Thanks, Alex. A lot of helpful tips there. No questions, but I think you did a good job explaining everything. Yeah, that last one, hidden values, is tough if you don't know that it's a thing and you go into a workbook and can't figure out where the data is at. It's really confusing. So want to get that one out there. All right, so I'm going to be up next. Get my notes. Go. Okay, get my setup. All right, so I'm going to go a little bit further into the troubleshooting in Tableau workbooks. This one's going to be focused more around the data, specifically with cross-referencing other data sets in Tableau. So we're going to go over the SPICE method, which is just something I kind of came up with, having to do a lot of this recently. All right, and just a refresher on me, I'm Jay. I'm the Senior Manager of Data Viz here at Avalytics, lead the practice, everything data viz wise, data architecture. Been in Tableau 5 years or so, and then in free time I like to rock climb, do yoga, mountain bike, stuff like that. All right, so this is again a presentation for Tableau developers. We're going to go through troubleshooting mismatched metrics, covering the SPICE method, and then also do some demos on cross-referencing data sets using Tableau. All right, so matching metrics. Have you guys ever had to create calculations to match metrics in another dashboard or a database without knowing the exact logic used? Because I have, and I bet some of you have too. And this is something that makes me want to tear my hair out sometimes. It's kind of just shooting in the dark, right? So some scenarios where this might happen is there's logic done in SQL that you don't have access to, you just have the resulting table. Maybe there's logic done in another application that you can't understand or you don't have access to. You're migrating from ClickSense or Power BI or like some other data viz tool, right? And you can see the output and you need to recreate that. Your calculations just aren't working correctly, or you're trying to redo a complicated or nested calculation. I actually had an instance this morning where I had two different sheets in my workbook that I needed to display the same metric, but one of the sheets used filters to achieve that metric and the other used calculated fields. And so I had to do this because I was combining data sets in the second sheet, and so I couldn't use filters. So the calculations involved nested level of detail and the numbers weren't matching. And so I used this method, and it ended up being a filter that I had on context that affected one of those LODs that I had to remove from context. And I had it there for performance reasons, just by habit. And so I had to remove that, and then my calculations worked right. So I went through this process, or a portion of it, this morning to do that. All right, so the SPICE method. This is something I came up with. So separate the numerator and the denominator if you're using a metric that is a ratio. Next is to partition the data into smaller groups, get it down to a manageable size, and then isolate a subset of that data that is different. And then you want to cross-reference your subsets from your two data sources, and then examine the fields used in your data set and calculations for unexpected values, or maybe you can isolate, a field where the logic is happening and compare that. So we're going to do two use cases today, one where the record counts don't match, and another one where they do match. So these use cases were pretty difficult to come up with, so they might not be perfect, but I want you to focus more on the process that I outlined in the actual use case. All right, so first one, trying to match a calculation in another application where the record counts don't match. So we're going to be using, we're making something in Tableau, and there's another application, and we're trying to match that metric. We're going to use profit ratio. We're going to use sample superstore for this use case. So this is a pretty common one for me these days. There's a high level report that is done in ClickSense for one of my clients that uses pre-calculated values done in an AWS glue job. And there's a high complexity to these calcs. And then when we make a change, the values of the data aren't always what we expect in the database. And we have to troubleshoot why our numbers don't match. So we have two reports because one of them is the high level one, and then the Tableau one, you have a lot of level of granularity. We go really deep, have a lot of filters, and we can't pre-calculate all of that. So we're trying to match these two together and keep them in sync. All right, so using profit ratio, and we can see here that Tableau is a little bit higher, and then the other application is a little bit lower, but 1.1% off, but it's enough that we need to dig into it. So to refresh on what profit ratio is, it is sum of profit over sum of sales. So it is a ratio metric. So first step in the SPICE method is to separate the numerator and the denominator and see if it's in one of those, or it's in both, or if it's a record counts. So we can see here on the left, I have what's coming out of Tableau, and then on the right, what's coming out of the other application, which I did in Tableau for this demonstration. We can see that profit is mismatched between both of them. Sales is mismatched. Our metric, of course, is mismatched. And then the record count is actually off. So there we go. So maybe it's a record count issue. Maybe it's not a logic issue at all. It's just we're not getting the same number of records in our queries. So we're short by 11 in the other application, or the 11 extra in Tableau. All right, so the next step is to partition the data into smaller groups. And the point of this is to see if the problem is localized to a certain time period or a certain dimension, or if it's consistent across your data set, and also just to trim down the data set to make it more manageable. If you're dealing with, 5 million, 10 million records, you don't want to try to cross-reference and examine that. You want to get it down to a set that is different. So we're only off in a few subcategories. So it's not specific to one subcategory because we have a few that are off, but I'm going to choose bookcases because that seems to be the smallest subcategory where we have a difference. And so that'll be the smallest subset to isolate. So again, the next step is isolate that subset. So we're going to run a query, we're going to export, do whatever we can to get that different subset out of the other application into Excel or something we can put into Tableau. So this is what that looks like. Next step is we're gonna cross-reference the subsets. The record counts don't match, which cause the metrics not to match, and we need to find the records in our data set that are not in the other one. So we can do this a few different ways. You could manually do it with your eyes and look record by record and see which ones aren't there. You could use Excel to cross-reference, probably using a VLOOKUP. or you could use Tableau, which would make it way easier, and which is what we are going to do today, because this is a Tableau user group. So when we cross-reference, we can do it two ways. We can either use a blend or a join, depending on the use case. For this one, since we have a different number of rows, we can actually use a join, and it'll give us no values on the right side of our join for the records that aren't there. So what we need to do is duplicate the original data source in Tableau. I always duplicate when I'm troubleshooting. I don't want to mess up my original one, add complexity to it. So when I'm done troubleshooting, I can just delete it, and it doesn't affect my other work. Then we're going to add a connection to this isolated export, and then we're going to create a left join. So this is where it's important to know the granularity of your data set. And then Sample Superstore, we have order ID and then product name. So there's not one row per order in the data set. You could have many rows per order, but there's only one product per order because there's a quantity field, I think. So that's the level of granularity we need to join on. So I'm gonna hop over to Tableau and do this demo now. So we're gonna go into our Sample Superstore data set. We're going to add a connection. So I think it's a CSV file. There it is, yeah. So I've already exported that Sample Superstore orders, the bookcases only. So I'm gonna bring that in. I'm gonna open up my orders. So we have the logical relationships, then we have the physical joins. This is the physical layer. And we're gonna bring this in. And it automatically does an inner join, but we want to do an outer join, or a left join, sorry. So we'll change it to left. Then we want to do it on order ID. And we want to do it on product name. So we get a one-to-one match. This is important. We need that one-to-one match between our two data sets. There we go. So we have our join. Get out of that. Okay, so we've set up the join. Go back over to Tableau. It's going to run the extract. All right. So now we can see we have in Tableau, when you join, it appends the table name if the field names are the same. So now I have two of every field in here, one that doesn't have anything after it and one that does, letting me know that's from the right side of my join. All right, so to cross-reference, we're going to filter for bookcases only using the field from the left side of our join, because that's the subset of data that we wanted to isolate, right? And then we're going to put any dimension on the right side of our join on the sheet, along with the record count, because we should see no values from that right side. So let's go in, let's filter for bookcases. Let's subcategory and product. We just want bookcases. And then I'm going to put subcategory up here from the other one just to stay consistent. And then we need our row count. So there we go. We can see that going back to the other slide, we had 228 in one side and 227 in the other. So we get that 227 from the left side and then that one extra one from the right side. So we've isolated that single record that's different. So now, I'm actually not gonna do it yet. So we've isolated that single record. So I'm gonna keep that one. And then I'm just gonna start pulling out all of the fields from the left side of my data set, right? Because one of these is probably gonna be different. D category, already got subcategory, manufacturer, product name, segment, ship date, ship mode. So what I would probably do is look at the fields that are used in my logic, but we're going to look at all the fields here, small data set. And we can see that one of these fields has a no value. So that's kind of unexpected. And this happens a lot in the data. If you're working with large SQL databases, you might get some nulls or some blanks even, right? When you're doing your logic and like if stuff is hard entered from people and they aren't accounted for in your SQL logic, and it throws a wrench into it, and you really have to like align on your SQL to get it together. So yeah, the postal code is null. So let's dive into that a little bit more. So I'm going to make a new worksheet and I'm going to pull out postal code and I'm going to see how many records are null. So there it is. There's 11 records that are null for postal code. And this is actually what's in Sample Superstore. I was just playing around with this and figured this out and thought it'd be a good use case. So they all come from, so let's keep these and pull out region, state, city. So there's this city in Vermont called Burlington that doesn't have a postal code in the Sample Superstore data set. So that seems to be the culprit. In the other database, we don't have that, right? So the other application is excluding any postal codes that are null, whereas in Tableau, our original application includes those records. So, you know, maybe in their query, they have a where clause or a joining on zip code and the records with null are not coming in. There's some sort of logic that is excluding records where postal code is null. So what we're able to do was we're able to isolate the records that were different, look at them, look at all the fields, and hopefully you know your data set well enough to be like, oh, there's null right there. Go look at that logic, boom, there it is. So if we exclude that null from profit ratio in our Tableau workbook, then we get the same profit ratio. So again, focus on the process there. We want to, isolate, separate the numerator, the denominator, partition it down into smaller groups, isolate that subset that's different. We can do a cross-reference and then just kind of look at your fields with that smaller subset of data that you know is different. And that'll help you pinpoint where the problem's at. All right, so use case number 2 is we're going to troubleshoot when record counts do match. So we're going to try to match a calculation done in a database where record counts match. So this one, we're going to use Hoopinator data, which is a tool that we created using 30 years of March Madness, like 30 years of NCAA basketball data. So we created this and we run machine learning models on it to predict the winners of teams in the tournament. And last year we actually bet $1,000 on all the games in the tournament total. And then we donated the $1,000. We broke even. We donated $1,000 to Great Plains SPCA. So we're gonna do that again this year. So stay tuned for that. We're gonna have new models this year. It's gonna be really fun. And hopefully we can raise some more money for charity. So we're gonna use this data set, which Alex kind of previewed previously as well. And we're going to compare the pick percentages in Tableau and then in some database that we don't have access to the logic, hypothetically. So looking at this data, the source table has a row per team per game, and a win probability is assigned to each team for each game. And this probability ranges from 0 to 1 and adds to 1 between the two teams. So for every game, we have 2 rows, 1 for each team, and then the probability is split between them. So we can see in this first game, we think Alabama is going to win, has a 70.9% chance of winning, which leaves Memphis with a 29.1% chance of winning. And so to get our percentage on how well we can pick, we need to do a calculation that totals all of our correct picks divided by all of the teams. And so I have a pick flag that I've created, basically a flag just 1 or 0. And so if the team we pick wins, which is this first case, then we're going to return a 1. If the team we don't pick loses, then we're going to return a 1. And we're going to return to 0 for all other scenarios, right? So if we get it right, we get a 1. If we don't, we get a 0. And so this is going to return 1s and 0s. And so the sum and the count, sum's going to be our corrects and the count's going to be the total. So our metrics don't match, remember? So we get in the database, they get a 69.94% ELO pick percentage. And then in Tableau, we're getting a 69.73%. So we're going to separate the numerator and the denominator. and see that the number of teams picked is correct, like those match, but our total team rows, our denominator is different. The denominator is different in the database, causing our pick percentage to be off, but our record count is the same. So something's up with that logic where the denominator, the pick flag, so counting it. So first thing we're going to do is partition the data into smaller groups. So I'm doing it by season for this one. I'm using a date field. And just to check to see if it's, 1 year or like, the most recent ones or something. And all of them seem to be a little off. So I'm just going to pick 2018. There seems to be 12 records or 12 rows, total team rows. So 12 denominator records that are different. And I'm going to get that even smaller. So I'm going to go another level of granularity. I'm going to go down into pick week 9. So then we can see that we do have weeks that are different, a few of them, but there's the most here, 608 and 612. So that gets it down to 600, which is pretty manageable to do a cross-reference on. The next is to isolate the subset of the data that's different. So I have my 612 records from Tableau, and then my 612 records from my database export. And when you're doing these queries, make sure that you include all columns that are used in your calculations, because you never know what field you're going to need to look at. This one's pretty simple. We only have a few columns, but in the real world, you'd want to do that. All right, now cross-referencing. Again, our counts of ELO cover flag or pick flag do not match, but the record counts do match. So we need to find the records that are being counted different. So we're off by 4. So there's 4 records we want to find, and hopefully that'll give us a clue into what logic is different. So again, you can do this manually, you can use it with Excel, or you can use Tableau. So in this case, we can't really join to find those null records, to find the records that don't exist. We have the same amount of records, so we're going to use a blend here. And this is where another cool functionality I'm going to demo, where you can actually copy paste data into Tableau. You don't have to create a data connection. You can just copy and paste it in, which is really nice. And then we'll create relationships for our blend, and then we'll create filters to see the mismatched records. So that filter is going to look something like this, where we're saying, hey, that field exists in our database. Does it exist in the other database? And when they do, we're going to equal true. And if not, we're going to equal false. So we're going to turn a true false to let us know which records where that field does not equal the same. So let's go over and I'm going to open up this Excel file, which is an export from my SQL database. All right, so I'm going to copy this out, and then I'm going to go into Tableau, and I can just right click anywhere like the sheets. I think the data pane, you can do it. You can click paste, and it's going to paste that data source in for you. And it comes in as a clipboard. So I'm going to rename this data sample. All right, so I've got my new data source. Copy and paste it in. This is what that's from. So DB sample. All right, so what I need to do is to cross-reference. I need to set up my relationships. So I'm going to come in, data, edit blend relationships. And my primary data source is going to be NCAA Tableau, and my secondary is going to be the sample data source. Now, since this is an export and I've conveniently named the fields exactly the same, then it automatically lines them up. If you had to, if your field names weren't the same and you had to establish relationship, you could click add, click custom, and then click add, and then pick the fields that you wanted. So what I'm going to do is next is create that calculated field. So are the pick flags equal? So if my pick flag equals, I can just drag it in from this one, ELO pick flag from the database, then true, else false, end. So it's going to give me an error because when you use a field from a blended data source, it has to be at aggregate. And since these should be 1-to-1, that's fine. So I'm actually going to use a max field here, and then I'm going to put a max field here, just because it's what I usually use. You could use some if you wanted to. Since it's 1-to-1, it should be fine. You can use any aggregation, but that gives me a valid calculation, just evaluating if the field in one equals the field in the other. So I've got my field. So now I'm going to pull out the level of detail that I need for this. I need the game. I do need to remember, isolate it back down into the 2018 season. And then also week 9, right? Week numbers, week 9. All right, yep. So there we go. Now to get my team ID out, put my team name to. So I have my 612 rows. I'm going to pull out my pick flag here from my primary data source. I'm going to go to my secondary data source. I'm going to pull out my pick flag. I'm going to convert it to a dimension first, and then pull it out. I can see that they're pretty much like the same, right? I could scan this and see where they're different because I have a feeling that they're different somewhere. Or I could use that field I created. So are the pick flags equal? I want them when they're not equal, right? So no. And then boom, I get 4. So I get 4 where the pick flag is null. So I wonder why that is. I'm going to pull out my win probability. This one, for the demo purposes. And it looks like the pick flags are null. I'm getting a mismatch where the win probability is 50%. So let me go look at my logic here. So I'm evaluating that. I guess I don't have a specific case where it's even, right? So maybe in the other database, they are evaluating when the win probability equals 50%, which means we can't pick a winner, that they're going to return null because they don't want it to affect the denominator, which would increase the percentage that they picked at, which makes sense, right? So there's technically no, there's no like right way for this one. This is kind of like one of those business requirements that you get and you interpret it one way, but you don't actually confirm logic with them. And then you have something and then they have something that's different, which seems to happen a fair amount of the time when you get down into the details. So if we wanted this to match, then we'd have to change from this logic into this logic. So if the win percentage equals 0.5 and 50%, then we return a null so that we don't get a game that's counted. Since we couldn't predict a winner, we're not going to say that we tried to predict a winner, and we're going to make our denominator smaller. So that's just, again, that's just going to be a matter of preference. There's no right way to do this. It's going to be, determining where the logic is different and then confirming with your stakeholder on what they want to use. So if we remove that, we'll get the same matching metric and we should be good. So again, using that method, separate the numerator and the denominator, partition, isolate, cross-reference, and then examine. So I've run into a lot of issues like I just cited in these use cases over the last few years, and I understand how daunting it seems to know when you don't know where to start. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from this is just have a process and have some sort of method for diagnosing and troubleshooting when you're trying to match something and where to start. Yeah, we need a Dune method, right? I should have done a spice like the blue eyes. Yeah. All right, any questions? I don't see any questions in the Q&A. So I'll try to get this up. This will be on YouTube, but I'll try to get a blog post on this too as well. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Chris now. He's going to dive into Tableau server.
All right. Oh, that was awesome. No, Jay, I assumed your spice method was because you just love pumpkin spice.
I do. It's that time of year, right?
Oh man, I'm thankful it's almost over. All right. So so I know we're up against time. So what I'm going to talk about today, let me share my screen here. All right. Thumbs up or verbal cue that everybody can see.
Good to go.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Sean. All right, so the kind of overview of the afternoon has been for Tableau developers, and this is certainly for those of you that are Tableau developers. You're working in Tableau every day, but I want to actually give you some. If you're a Tableau user, maybe you just view dashboards on a regular basis, or you're a server admin, or you do make dashboards for people. And so I know that you fall in one of those three camps. But I want to give some examples here of things that over the past I've been working in. So kind of let me give my little spiel here so that you know who I am. So again, you can find me at CG Scott DBA, and there I am. I can't seem to let go of that until the next Tableau conference. I am a Tableau user group ambassador. I'm also a co-leader of the RDU Tug, as you'll see behind me. I can never move the right direction. And I am also a business intelligence enablement lead here at Enact Mortgage Insurance in Raleigh, and I run our Tableau server. And if you were on when we were first getting on, you know that we are in we're migrating to Tableau Online, so that's really exciting for me. Brand new groundwork, and I love getting to work with all things Tableau. And again, my family. And as if our little six-pack didn't have enough fun, we just added a golden doodle, Penelope, and she is she is actually right beside me. So anyway, but I mentioned that because I have been all across the board in my Tableau career over the past 9 years, and so I know when I first started out that there were I was really itching for Tableau server, and I knew that we needed it to be successful in our Tableau implementation. But I didn't quite know why. I knew we needed to show our dashboards. Okay, that's great. Well, you convince your organization to spend, I don't know, some instances it's up to $500,000 maybe, or even if it's less than $100,000, you got to have some reason why. You can't just say, oh, we need Tableau server, or as Jay and I were just talking about, you need conductor or data management. You've got to be able to give a return on your investment. And so that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about today, is some lessons in things that I have learned, some ways that we have actually showcased Tableau server to our user group. And then if you don't have Tableau server, this will be some great opportunities for you to go back to your management and your leadership and say, these are really great reasons why we can't just do it on desktop alone, or heaven forbid you're using Reader, and then there's a whole host of issues going on that we could go into. But yeah, so we'll walk through here what we're talking about Tableau server, and some deep dive features for your users and for yourself if you're using Tableau on a daily basis. So the first thing we're going to dive into is the home screen. Then we're going to talk about custom views a little, and then we're going to talk about subscriptions, alerts, and finally, the last two features that I want to spend probably the most time on, but I'm actually going to really just scratch the surface. I highly encourage you to go back and watch especially this year's Tableau conference, TC21, tc21.tableau.com, I think gets you there, events.tableau.com. All those links will get you there. But we're going to talk about augmented analytics. And so that's Ask Data and Explain Data, which is already in Tableau Desktop, but in the newest release in 2021.4, it will actually be available on the server. So every user will be able to use it. And now I say every user, let me make a quick caveat. Depending on which version you're on, it makes it kind of a big difference, because as you get more and more advanced in Tableau's offering, which is why I can't strongly recommend Tableau Online enough. But the more you get advanced in your Tableau offering, they've actually increased the level of what viewers can do. So if you've got the role-based offering and you're sitting here, you're wondering, okay, does everybody need to be an explorer? Because they're not going to have everything. And then we're going to spend, 4 times as much a year. They've actually been giving Tableau has been giving a lot of features and functionality to viewers. So essentially, unless you're publishing things or editing dashboards or workbooks, you really can get away with a lot by just giving an individual viewer access. So that's just a little tidbit here from your fellow neighborhood Tableau guy, that if you are in between there and you're wondering, check out, there is a great blog post on there on Tableau's community page all about what the different permissions can do. So I highly recommend looking at that to determine what do your users need and how much do they need. And maybe you can, it looks really good on an end of year performance review when you can say, hey, we only needed, we only really needed about a dozen or so explorers, and the rest of them could be viewers, and you save your company a couple $1,000. That's a really good win at the end of the year. So, all right. Got a quick little chat. All right. Nope. All right. So, all right, here we go. So make yourself at home. So we're going to talk about 3 things that are available on the home screen. And as you know, all right, favorites, recents, and recommendations. So I know the users are keen to using their URL. They take their URL, they bookmark it, and they go in. We've been trying to get our users, and I recommend getting yourself accustomed and making yourself at home on the home screen, because you have access to favorites, you have access to recents, and one of the things I love the most is the recommendations. Tableau is using your group permissions and your activity to actually make some recommendations, kind of like Google's engine, right, of things that you might be interested in that you've never actually clicked on. Oh, I didn't know I had access to this. This is a really cool dashboard. So like I said, make yourself at home, use the favorites. We'll go in, I'll show you how to, if you don't know how to make favorites, really quick and easy making a star. But those are really some functionalities that can get you and your users acclimated into the server without having to worry about bookmarks. And then if you over publish, if you write over something on server and you're using different names or something, and somebody's bookmark breaks, you're screwed. I mean, so sorry for the language. So you lose that functionality. But if you use favorites, and if you rename something or something else changes, or if you move it to another project or folder, then it will stay. It stays with the workbook. So utilize favorites, utilize your recents and the recommendations. Really, really cool functionality that not a lot of people get used to. All right, so we're going to talk about custom views here in a second. I'm actually going to dive into Tableau here. So again, why do we use custom views? Really easy access for return users to their data. I mentioned using favorites. It's even easier if they've got a favorite, they dive right in. And a lot of that, which has already been mentioned here today about filtering and those performance issues that can be, bad on a desktop, but worse on server. If they're already filtered down to their clients, their region, their whatever, that's less time that you have to spend seeing a dashboard churn and churn and churn. So the next thing is create custom subscriptions for just their view. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump in because this is not a show thing. This is a tell thing. So we're going to show and tell here. So I'm going to show you all. So basically I'm using Tableau's provided Tableau Online, which if you don't have Tableau Online, you don't have Tableau Server, or you're just looking to kind of test some new functionality, go to Tableau Augmented. I'll provide you all the link at the end of this demo. And you can go to tableau.com solutions, augmented analytics, and you can start the interactive demo, which is what I've done here. And this actually provides you a real life functioning. It's kind of limited, but it's still, you can utilize some of these features and functionality. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to use this to go through our next couple points. But essentially what we talked about were these custom views. So again, we have, let's go back to our favorites. So here's our Superstore augmented view here. All right, and you see here, we've got a little star here, but you notice that star's not filled in. It's not a favorite of mine. So what do we do here? We can click and we can make it a star. And now when we go back to home and we go back to our home screen, not our Explorer, there it is. An overview has been added to our favorites, and there it is, right in our favorites. It's the first thing that comes up. So a user experience, which is always what we're after. Building good dashboards means nothing if people have a really hard time getting to them. They're not going to want to come back if their experience is terrible. So Tableau has increased these functionalities and these these tools for your users and for you to access the data as they need it, as with the click of a button. So again, really easy, add the star button and you can get back to it. Now, we talked about creating custom views. You see my view here is original, but what if I'm the manager of the East region? Now I know you're all in Kansas City or somewhere around there. Well, I'm in the East region. I'm actually in the South region. So, you know, when I come into Jay's dashboard every day, Jay, sorry, I don't care about what's going on in Kansas City. I care about what's going on here in Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, right here. So I want to know when I come in, I don't want to have to filter through and take, 10, 15, 20 seconds just to get to my view of my region. And also I see here the default date thing here is from 1/1 to 1/3 to 2021. Well, I really only care about the past 6 months. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to move this to, it probably should be a, I'm not going to worry about it because it's not my dashboard. But if it were a dynamic date or relative date, that'd be even easier. But I really only care about things from June until the present. So I've got my custom view here. Well, now I can go in here and I can save this. So South region past 6 months, and I can make it my default. So when I click on this dashboard, that's the first thing I'm going to see. So you see here, I've saved it. Now you can also share those with others, but we're not going to go into that right now. But now, as soon as I go into the overview tab, immediately I'm seeing my South region for the past 6 months, and that's going to come up every single time. So no worry about loading; it's going to automatically filter to that. Now, what's great is if I really want to know every single week without having to go in here, I want to look at this view. And I want to look at it, and go to my schedule. I want to look at it daily, every day. I only want to look at it weekly on Mondays when I come in. And I want to say, South region, past 6 months. And voila. So I've got the time zone you can edit, but I am going to see this view. So that is my custom view that I have created. And I'm going to subscribe to that. And so every single Monday, I'm going to get the South region's sales for that particular, for the past 6 months without having to filter anything, without having to go into the dashboard. Again, we want to put the analytics and all the hard work that we've spent, we want to put it right at their fingertips. So again, those are custom views. Those are subscriptions. So we talked a little bit about subscriptions. I highly recommend, even if you have to build them for kind of, it's that whole mentality of, do you teach somebody to fish or give them a fish? Well, oftentimes you have to give them a little taste, right? So oftentimes what we have to do as creators and developers is we have to provide those subscriptions to them. So subscribing somebody, that can literally, from my experience, be the difference between somebody using Tableau and somebody not, by simply getting the dashboard right on their screen in front of them every day or every week. That can be the difference between them using and getting into Tableau and not. If you say, oh, here's your link and go follow this to go check your data, who cares, right? That's the so what. So we want to provide them, again, analytics, all the hard work that we've done right to their fingertips. So you can subscribe. You don't have to just subscribe. And again, I'm sorry. So this is on Tableau. So I don't have the permissions here to do it. So that's my fault. But you can actually, on your server, you can subscribe others. And if you can't, ask your server admin. I'm sure they would not have a problem, because that would be a great way for you to, again, increase the data culture among your organization. So you can also do it as PDF, as an image in a PDF. I found that different companies have different restrictions on the attachment types from Tableau. So depending on your whitelist and things like that, you might want to check and see how those images and PDFs are going to get sent to your audience. And again, making custom messages, having the subject as custom. What we've even done, because we've had some issues with our firewall, is actually in the subject line, provided the URL for the viz, and that actually helps people, even though they can't click on the link, they can actually get into it right through there. So we've kind of gone a step beyond just to make it that much easier for a user to get in. All right, so we talked about views. You can also create alerts. So if I see my furniture sales, if I click on this axis, well, I think I have to actually go into the alerts here. So if I want to know when furniture is in my region for the past 6 months, if I want to know when it reaches a certain threshold, create. Well, I apologize. Then numeric axis. Well, I can do it on this one. Let's see. Create an alert. There we go. So in the consumer, so if the sales in the consumer are above equal to, you set your threshold, and then you can select the recipients that you want. You can also make it visible to others. So other people that have access to this dashboard can see your alert and go, oh, well, it looks like Chris is really interested in seeing when those sales were above, $7,100. There must be something to that number. So I want to keep an eye on that too. So you can share those alerts with others. One of the cool functionalities as well, if you're curious about if a data source is updated and your users don't have access to the behind the scenes, which most of them don't, you can actually create an alert by creating a dummy calculation. And I don't have the time to show you how to do this, but Google it, custom alerts for data-driven updates. It is a very, very cool thing where you can actually get an alert and it will actually send out an email every day when the data has refreshed. So that way, if you have a data source that's kind of finicky and you don't know when it's going to finish, or if it takes a long time some days, that will let your audience know exactly when that data source is finished by creating that today equals 1 type of calculation. Anyway, Google it. It's a great feature. Jay, I'll include it on the in my wrap up when I send it to you all. So the last thing we'll talk about, I know I've only got 4 minutes, so I'll wrap up really quickly. Utilizing the Ask Data functionality. Again, if you haven't watched the keynote, I highly recommend it. Going and watching the keynote from this year, you'll see much more than I could ever explain in a couple minutes about how to utilize natural language processing for diving into the data. But one of the things I wanted to show you, which it doesn't get mentioned a lot, and somebody mentioned it earlier about looking into the details on Tableau dashboard. Well, your users don't have access to the dashboard, or most of them probably won't. So they can't just download the workbook, look at the data source and see what the details are. But if they're doing if they wanted to look at this data set and go, okay, well, I really want to know, what counties or what states or, anything that's in my data. Ask Data is not only a really cool tool where you can actually ask in a natural language, but you can also look at the values and look at what's in the data without having to dive in and open up a new workbook, download a data source or anything like that. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because that's a really cool functionality. And again, the elevation of privileges has been brought to users, to viewers in later versions in Tableau. And the last thing I want to do is I did want to showcase the explain data. Again, the functionality here has been ramped up in later versions. And so in this version, you'll not only see that you have access to this this Ask Data here. So I can click on this little button and I can actually ask data right here in the menu. I don't have to stay at the data source. I can say, what were the sales for the for past 6 months? Order date in the last 6 months. You see it starts filling it out for me, all right here within the same visual interface. So really, really cool. But the last thing I wanted to show you was explain data. So, you want to know, okay, it looks like something's going on here in November in 2021 in the technology sector. I really want to know what it is. So the same way you look at view data, you now have the opportunity in server to click on this little light bulb and go to explain data. And Tableau will use those augmented analytics to bring in fields that are not necessarily on your dashboard, but things like profit that's higher, the sum of sales is higher than expected. And then you can look at different explanations, unique attributes to that specific, category that could provide some additional analysis. And again, Tableau is making these things so easy and right at the tips of the fingers of not just you, the developer, but all of your end users. So they can start asking questions of the data without having to come to you and say, hey, what is going on in November with technology? I mean, it looks pretty good. They can start to do some of that analysis themselves. So I highly recommend, leveraging these functionality, going to this site and using, again, I'll showcase that. Going to this site, this interactive demo, using it for yourself, showing your audience these features and functionality, and making this your own. And this is really how we start to, if you have a good data culture and you want to make it better, if you have no data culture and you want to make it, you want to do something, these are great starters for getting people acclimated and using these really cool functionality that don't take, again, code free. They didn't have to build anything. They don't have to know about the data. They can just start asking questions of the data and using these dashboards for themselves. So without further ado, that is my time. I did see we have a few things in the chat. All right. So that is it for me. Jay, Sean, any questions in the Q&A?
What version was that? Was it coming out like when does .4 come out?
Soon.
Yeah, I haven't really heard anything about when it'll be out, but we're hoping here pretty soon.
Well, it's got to be this month.
It's got to be. I mean,
2022.
yeah, you would think code freeze happens next week. So
yeah,
I don't know
okay,
where my
cool.
there it goes. Sorry.
Yeah, that was really cool. That was really cool, Chris. I've got to do it. Yeah, I've got to do a Tableau user training. It's actually in January now, but stuff like that can be really helpful with just adoption, and people just don't know about it. I mean, like the commenting feature and stuff where you can comment and save you have something filtered or whatever, and it saves that link and that view, and it's directly in there. And most people, I don't think, know about that functionality.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful. So
it's just under the surface. So
right.
to help them along. Yeah, it's gone.
We didn't even get into all the Slack integration.
Yeah, see, we're not even there. So that's a whole other ball game. So yeah, go check out tc21.tableau.com for showcasing how to use the Slack integration if you have Slack at your work.
Chris, do you guys do a Tableau user onboarding training when people come on, how to use the server?
For typically it's dashboard based. So if a new dashboard is coming out, or if a big dashboard is coming out to a new group that maybe they've used Tableau in the past, but we really want them to leverage, this is your new single source of truth. This is where you're going. We'll do specific user group trainings for those groups. And so we've got a few. This is actually a really it's almost mostly stolen from one of my colleagues that she created a lot of this for that group. We worked together on it, but anyway, she did this for her group when she had a dashboard that was coming out. And that was, again, how to use those pieces and functionality in server. Cause yeah, they usually just use the email and that's it. Or they save the biggest problem was saving the bookmark. That's why I started there. Cause yeah. I mean, the number of times that I've gotten emails because, oh, Tableau's not working. It can't find this dashboard or this workbook. Yeah, it's because the link is broken. And so we had to explain to them, especially we just went through a rebranding project. And so a lot of our stuff had gotten changed, it got moved. We've done some, some things. And especially as we're going to Tableau Online now, completely new URL, everything's going to break. So we're going to have to, so this will be probably a training at the beginning of 2022 for all users.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about I'm working with groups who haven't really used Tableau before. One group we're recreating something in Tableau that was in a different application that was really expensive and like didn't give them all the functionality. So like I'm used to working with groups who are really into Tableau, and now I have to explain like what a tooltip is and like, you know, all this kind of stuff, right? That it would be just something I have, you know, to give them like, here's 15 minutes on how to just use Tableau and what its functionality is. And I get a lot of questions around exporting the data, like I'm sure you do too. And that's gotten better though. It's gotten better in the newer versions. It's a little bit more intuitive.
I mean, that ask data functionality, hopefully when we get it right on the server and they can stop having to do the pivot tables, and because they want to know what all the fields are and which is this. And yeah, so I think that's the next phase is how to get more users in that Explorer group. You know, I said they have a lot of power in viewer, but we really want them to explore the data. So
yeah, and feel comfortable like knowing what they're doing and not just like clicking around and getting confused when stuff changes, right?
Yep.
And I can double down on what you said, Chris, about the subscriptions. I don't know how many times I've had dashboards where I'm like, man, this is what they wanted. No one's looking at it. And then I'm like, I'm gonna go to talk to the stakeholder and set up a subscription, you know, hold their hand a little bit, and the views just blow up. So I think it's a whole out of sight, out of mind thing. So
sure.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you,
Thanks
Liam. Thank you,
me.
Alex. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in today. Hope you learned something. We had a wide range of use cases and, you know, areas of Tableau. So Sean, did we have anything on the docket for January, February yet?
No, we don't have anything yet. We'll be letting you know. I think we're meeting to figure out what we're gonna do. So if you guys have any ideas, if anyone has any ideas, what you want to what you want to see, what you want to learn about, what you want to hear about, let us know. We'll figure out a way to get that knowledge to you. So yeah, we'll be letting you know. But you can probably expect a meeting sometime late January. So that's probably what we'll do.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yep.
thanks, guys.
Happy holidays.
Yes. Happy holidays. Merry Christmas.
See you guys.
Be safe.
Yep.